Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Everybody pay attention to Bai Xiaochun from the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. Just because he's a diva doesn't mean that he'll hold back from fighting nascent soul cultivators. You'd be gravely mistaken if you thought he would. According to our intelligence report, he's a twisted individual who takes delight in bullying people weaker than him. He's definitely the most powerful diva from the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, and yet, for his entire life, he's done nothing but oppress those with lower cultivation bases than himself. He's the epitome of shamelessness, and all of you need to be very careful around him. All of you need to be on guard against Bai Xiaochun. He's done a lot of very strange things in his life. He served on the Great Wall, then disappeared into the wildlands for several decades. When he came back safely, he was a diva. What's most terrifying about him, however, is not his cultivation base. It's his medicinal pills. According to the limited information we have access to, if he's given the right opportunity, his pill concocting methods can destroy an entire river source sect. Perhaps you people might not have heard of Bai Xiaochun. However, you've surely heard of the fantasy pills that come from the eastern Heavenspan River. Remember the catastrophes that resulted years ago because of those pills? Well, this guy is the despicable villain who created them. When Bai Xiaochun heard what the people from the other 3 river branches were saying about him, a strange, embarrassed look appeared on his face. Then he shook his head. I can't believe I'm so famous. When did my fantasy pill end up reaching the West? Are they the same as the ones from Sky City? And who said I like to bully people with a lower cultivation base than me? That's just called playing it safe. Despite being slightly irritated, he was generally pleased by how famous he was. Even he hadn't been aware of how far his name had spread. HMMMPHH. If they knew that the giant ghost king is my father-in-law, and that my apprentice is the Hell Emperor, then they would definitely be scared out of their minds. Thinking in that way made him feel even more pleased. However, it was at about this time that he suddenly heard the sound of people talking, from the direction of the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. Bai Xiaochun? HMPH. He just got lucky, and became a diva earlier than expected. It won't be long before I become a diva, and then I'll definitely defeat him in battle. He's pretty good looking. Too bad he's a guy. The people who were speaking were nascent soul cultivators, and their words were not pleasing at all to Bai Xiaochun. He immediately glared over in their direction, which attracted the attention of the twin master cloud lightnings, who looked back in his direction. The instant their gazes met, Bai Xiaochun's spirits lifted. Hey, another staring contest, huh? Obviously, Bai Xiaochun would never willingly be outdone at his own favorite hobby. Therefore, he intensified his glare. However, it was only moments later that he was shocked to find how incredibly intimidating Master Cloud Lightning was. Damn it, there are 2 of them. The twin Master Cloud Lightnings looked at him coldly with 2 sets of eyes. Their gazes were incredibly intense, which made it difficult for Bai Xiaochun to stand up to them alone. He quickly called Song Ke over to help him. However, before they could team up, the cultivators from the 4 different battleships all fell silent. That was when Bai Xiaochun noticed that a group of people had stepped onto the docks, having just emerged from the majestic mountains that linked to the main part of Heavenspan Island. In the lead was a beautiful young woman wearing a long, violet gown embroidered with 9 phoenixes. She had a crimson mark on her forehead, and there was something about her that seemed profoundly noble. When she looked out at everyone, her gaze seemed like the type that no one could defy. As soon as Bai Xiaochun saw her, a tremor passed through him, and complicated feelings rose up in his heart. He suddenly had no interest in the staring contest with the twin master cloud lightnings. All he could do was look quietly at the young woman. She was none other than Du Lingfei. They hadn't seen each other in a very long time, and for some reason, she seemed more noble than she had in the past. As she stood there, it was clear that she was the focus of all the eyes present. There was definitely something different about her, and it couldn't help but make him feel that she was a bit of a stranger. Flanking Du Lingfei were 2 groups of cultivators. On her left side was a group of female cultivators in red clothing, while on her right side were male cultivators in blue clothing. All of them were spectacularly good-looking. A mere glance at the 2 groups of cultivators would cause anyone's eyes to glitter. They were dressed alike down to the smallest detail, and were arranged in perfect ranks. Furthermore, they pulsed with incredible energy, as though all of them were capable of drawing upon the might of Heavenspan Island itself. Overall, they were very impressive. Bai Xiaochun quickly spotted Hu Xiaomei in one of the groups, and Ghostfang in the other. In almost the same moment, Hu Xiaomei caught sight of him, and the faintest shadow of a smile appeared on her face. A sparkle of joy could also be seen in her eye. If it weren't for the solemn responsibilities she held, she would clearly have run over and hugged Bai Xiaochun. Ghost Fang also noticed Bai Xiaochun, but his face remained expressionless, and he barely glanced at him. When Bai Xiaochun saw Hu Xiaomei safe and unharmed, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, he couldn't shake the mixed emotions that had risen up inside of him because of Du Lingfei. At this point, Du Lingfei smiled and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists, and welcome to Heavenspan Island." There was a dignity within her voice that was backed by the might of Heavenspan Island, something magical that caused it to penetrate deep into the hearts and minds of everyone present. Somber expressions could be seen on the faces of all of the cultivators present. The diva experts all stepped forward, clasped hands and bowed. "Well met, emissary." The polite words were uttered by the twin Master Cloud Lightnings, Guru Spirit Immortal, and Master Thousand Ghost. None of them had ever seen Du Lingfei before, but knew that she had a special status, and didn't dare to say anything that might offend her. Bai Xiaochun almost didn't want to step forward, but considering that he was the diva in charge of the group from the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect, he knew he had to. Sighing, he clasped hands and bowed. However, he truly couldn't think of the right words to speak. The other devas noticed this, and were inwardly shocked. However, Du Lingfei's expression softened into a smile when she saw Bai Xiaochun bowing to her. However, she didn't say anything. Instead, she arranged for her special guards to formally receive all of the visitors from the 4 rivers. Each river branch had brought a few hundred people. Added together, there were about 1,000, which made the docks relatively crowded at the moment. However, thanks to Du Lingfei's arrangements, there was no chaos or confusion. "Fellow Taoists, it's already getting late, so please follow these special guards to your accommodations. Rest up, for early in the morning, when the bells toll 7 times, people will come to take you for an audience with the Celestial." After a moment of thought, she added, "By the way, there are many restricted areas on Heavenspan Island. In order to prevent any unforeseen circumstances, I would like to ask you to remain indoors through the night. Otherwise, the guards in those locations might injure or kill you, and we wouldn't want that." There was nothing threatening about the way Du Lingfei spoke. In fact, her voice was kind and warm. However, the words themselves struck fear into the hearts of all the cultivators present. Even the devas were shaken. Heavenspan Island was the nucleus of all the lands of Heavenspan, and although the Celestial's palace of the Tao wasn't particularly large, it was clearly as dangerous as a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. In fact, even demigod experts who acted improperly would be killed instantly. Because of that, the visitors didn't even need any reminders from Du Lingfei to keep them in line. The accommodations that had been arranged for them were not on the large part of the island, but rather, in the buildings which surrounded the docks. 4 main areas had been set up, with large buildings set aside for people who had come on formal visits. As for the main part of the island, no one was allowed there without the express invitation of the Celestial himself. The only thing they could do was gaze from afar at the 3 mountain peaks, and the occasional patrols of special guards that wound their way among the countless palace buildings. Bai Xiaochun didn't say anything as the Heavenspan Island special guards made their arrangements. Clearly, Hu Xiaomei wanted to come over, but she had been assigned to a different group, and could only gaze at him through the crowd. By evening, the more than 1,000 nascent soul cultivators had been taken to their various accommodations by the special guards. As a diva, Bai Xiaochun had a special courtyard residence to himself, which was much closer to the main entrance leading to the mountains of the island. The spiritual energy here was strong beyond belief, far stronger than in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. However, Bai Xiaochun was not in the mood for cultivation. As the sky grew dark, he sat there cross-legged, waiting. He was sure that Du Lingfei would come to visit him this very night. Night fell. The only sound to be heard was the gentle lapping of waves against the island, making everything very peaceful. As Bai Xiaochun sat cross-legged in meditation, his heart slowly grew calm. He had made his decision way back on the battleship. His trip to Heavenspan Island was for the purpose of getting a longevity pill, making sure that Hu Xiaomei was safe, and also, to find out why he had been so obsessed with Du Lingfei. He didn't sit reminiscing about the past. He just waited quietly. The same pressure from before weighed down on the island, and in fact, the lack of any sound other than the waves made that pressure seem even more intense. As a result, all of the visitors felt more awe and fear than ever. Such feelings were more intense among those with higher cultivation bases, the reason being that they could more clearly sense an aura that destabilized their cultivation bases and left their minds reeling. That aura could crush them out of existence at will. It was the most paramount of auras, the type that could not even be threatened by the heavens. In fact, the heavens even seemed ready to bow to the source of that aura. An aura like that, something completely domineering and elevated, could only belong to one person in the heavenspan realm, the celestial. That knowledge made the cultivators of the Four Rivers even more enthusiastic than before. The mere idea of becoming the apprentice of the celestial was profoundly exciting. Not even the devas could control their emotions. After all, the rules had not stipulated that only nascent soul cultivators could win the chance to become an apprentice. The only qualification was to be the first person to emerge from the trial by fire. Although the level of one's cultivation base could play into that, luck was a larger factor. And therefore, although devas did have an advantage, that advantage would only help them to a limited extent. As the night grew darker, most of the visiting cultivators sank into trances as they practiced cultivation. No one left their living quarters. It wasn't that they didn't want to, they didn't dare to. Not only had Du Lingfei offered that warning of hers, but the pressure that weighed down made it clear that only someone suicidal would go out into the open. Bai Xiaochun made the same decision, and simply sat waiting. Late in the night, he opened his eyes and looked over at the front door. In almost the same moment, an entrancing voice drifted in from outside. "Can I come in?" Only that one sentence was spoken, nothing else. Bai Xiaochun sent some divine sense over to the door, and could see Du Lingfei standing outside. She wasn't dressed like she had been during the day. She wore a white gown that was not ostentatious like her earlier garb, and made her seem just like she had been back in the Spirit Stream sect days. That gave Bai Xiaochun pause for thought. A moment later, he waved his hand, and the door opened, revealing Du Lingfei standing there with a smile on her face. Their gazes met. They were the same people that they had been all those years ago. However, on this occasion, Bai Xiaochun chose not to call her "Boo." "It's been a long time," she said. When she saw that Bai Xiaochun wasn't inclined to say anything in response, she laughed softly and then walked inside. Tucking a stray strand of hair back over her ear, she said, "Why aren't you saying anything?" As the moonlight tumbled down onto her from above, it made her look as delicate as fine jade. There was something beautiful, pure, and holy about her. When Bai Xiaochun caught the fragrance of her perfume, his heart began to beat a bit faster. After a moment of hesitation, he decided to just tell the truth. "I don't know what to say." Seeing that he was remaining seated, she sat down cross-legged in front of him and placed her hands on her knees. "Why don't you tell me about your time in the wildlands?" she said, not sounding the least bit irritated. He took a breath, and smelled her perfume again. Then he went on to give a brief overview of his time in the wildlands, leaving out the details of his secret identity. In the end, he looked her in the eye, took a deep breath, and said, "Thank you for that, diva soul." He didn't tell her that he had ended up forming a heaven-down nascent soul, and only casually mentioned some of the main events during his wildlands adventures. She didn't press for details. It was almost as if both of them were holding back from saying the things they truly wanted to say. Eventually, they lapsed into silence. Although they made a pretty picture, silhouetted against the moonlight, both of them felt like they were strangers to each other. The sound of the waves surrounded them, seemingly attempting to draw them closer together, and yet failing. After some time passed, Bai Xiaochun suddenly asked, "Who exactly are you?" It was the same question he had asked before leaving for the Great Wall. Way back then, she had told him that when he returned, she would tell him the truth. Therefore, he finally decided to simply ask the question. Du Lingfei didn't seem surprised at all, as if she had been waiting for him to ask. She didn't respond at first, and didn't even look at him. But after a moment passed, she looked up into his eyes. "The Celestial is my father." Although Bai Xiaochun had suspected for a long time that this was the case, to hear the words spoken directly, and to have his suspicions confirmed, caused waves of emotion to surge in his heart. He couldn't control his breathing at first. Despite the fact that he had considered the possibility, now that he knew the truth, there were many things that suddenly made sense. It made sense why Du Lingfei had such a special status in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. If the rumors were true that the demigod patriarchs of the Four River Source sects were the apprentices of the Celestial, then that made Du Lingfei their junior sister. With an identity and background like that, Du Lingfei had an extremely unique status in the Heavenspan realm. She was like a pearl of matchless quality. However, there were still unanswered questions. As the Celestial's daughter, a person with incredible standing, what had she been up to in the Spirit Stream sect? And why did she appear later in the Bloodstream sect? Such questions popped into his mind, and they led to more questions. And then, all of a sudden, he remembered something that caused him to tremble involuntarily. He had absorbed a blood hair from the Celestial. Back when he did it, he had hesitated. But the Celestial had been such a distant figure at the time, and the hair had been given to him by the Gravekeeper. Therefore, he had simply braced himself and gone through with the plan to absorb it. But now, he was on the Celestial's doorstep, and Du Lingfei was the Celestial's daughter. I see, he thought. Now it makes sense why the demigod patriarch of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect only let me off with a warning when I caused so much trouble with my pill concocting. Settling his thoughts, he asked, "Did you arrange for Hu Xiaomei to be brought here?" She actually didn't answer his question directly. She simply looked at him and smiled, much the same way she had back in the Luokan Mountains. She rose to her feet, walked over, and arranged his clothing like a wife would her husband's. Her proximity made the smell of her perfume even stronger, and caused his heart to beat faster. After smoothing out his robes, she looked into his eyes, mixed emotions swirling in her own. Immediately, Bai Xiaochun could sense that her life had not been as happy and carefree as might be expected considering who she was. In fact, she seemed exhausted, and even forlorn. The way she looked at him dredged up memories from the past that suddenly caused him to address her the way he had so long ago. Boo! She shivered as memories of her own overtook her thoughts. A moment passed, and then she leaned over, put her lips right next to his ears, and spoke in the quietest of voices. "Xiaochun, be careful of Hu Xiaomei." With that, she looked him in the eyes one more time, then turned and faded away into the air. As Du Lingfei's words rang in his ears, Bai Xiaochun suddenly went slightly stiff. Turning his head, he looked in the direction in which she had just vanished. Despite the fact that she had used the power of Heavenspan Island to fade away, he could still make out the faint shadow of her figure. He felt like going after her to ask more questions, but before he could, she entered the depths of the island. What did she mean by that? "I'm supposed to be careful of Hu Xiaomei?" The more he thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. Furthermore, he couldn't tell if she had been sincere or not. Either way, his uneasiness at the fact that Hu Xiaomei had become a special guard on Heavenspan Island only grew more intense than it had been before. Why do I need to be careful of Hu Xiaomei? He thought back to when he had seen her earlier that day, and from what he remembered, she hadn't seemed any different than she had in the past. And the happiness in her eyes when she spotted him had seemed real. However, he couldn't stop thinking about what Du Lingfei had just said. As he did, his vexation grew. The truth was that, the entire time he had been on Heavenspan Island so far, he had felt uneasy. After some more thought, he sighed. The best thing to do would be to find a chance to go talk with Hu Xiaomei. Even as he thought such things, his expression flickered, and he looked up. Moments later, he saw a beam of light streaking through the darkness toward him. It came to a stop outside his residence, converging into the form of a person who spoke in a sweet, sentimental voice. "Big Bro Xiaochun." It was none other than Hu Xiaomei. She wore the same long, red garment that she had worn earlier in the day. She was beautiful, her normally fair face flush with joy, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. Seeing Hu Xiaomei caused the things Du Lingfei had just said, and the suspicions they had aroused in his heart, to vanish for the moment. Hu Xiaomei looked exactly like she had earlier in the day, and the same as he remembered her from the past. This was the very same girl who had stuck so close to him in his early days in the Spirit Stream sect. She was Xiaomei, and she really was like the perfect girl next door. In sharp contrast to his somber reaction to seeing Du Lingfei, Bai Xiaochun rose to his feet and excitedly threw his arms wide. Blinking, he smiled mischievously and said, "Long time no see, Xiaomei. Come, give your big bro Xiaochun a hug." The light flush of joy which had covered her face instantly transformed into scarlet. Then she glared at him angrily, and yet, at the same time, rushed over and embraced him, burying her face in his neck. At first, she didn't hug him very hard, but as the moments ticked by, and she thought back to how lonely she had been since coming to the island, her grip tightened, as though she didn't wish to let him go. When he felt how tightly she was hugging him, his mischievous smile faded into one of tender affection. He wrapped his arms around her, stroked her long black hair, and breathed in deeply. She smelled completely different than Du Lingfei. He suddenly thought back to the first time he had ever laid eyes on Hu Xiaomei. She was the first girl that had ever truly captured his attention, although he had always been confused about how he felt toward her. All he knew was that right now, he was sure that he liked her, even though he didn't know why. Throughout the years he had known her, he had seen her act like a hot pepper around other people, but charming to him. That had always made him feel very good about himself. As he held Hu Xiaomei, he came to the conclusion that there was nothing out of the ordinary about her. She had not changed. She was exactly like she had been before. As she lay nestled in his arms, she murmured, "Big Bro Xiaochun, after all the years that have passed, I wasn't sure if you would even remember me." Already, her mood seemed to be sinking. Bai Xiaochun quickly sat down with her and started telling her his stories about the wildlands. He didn't go into all the details, only some of the most interesting parts. Soon, Hu Xiaomei's mood improved, and she even started laughing. Covering her smile with her hand, she said, "Come on. There's no way that you bossed devas around." When Bai Xiaochun realized that she didn't believe him, he gave up on being so humble. Glaring at her, he thumped himself on the chest and said, "That was nothing. A demigod gave me his daughter's hand in marriage. All of the nobility and aristocracy in Arch-Emperor dynasty were scared of me." Hu Xiaomei laughed. All right, I believe you. I do, alright? You were definitely awesome. My big bro Xiaochun is the most awesome person under heaven." When Bai Xiaochun heard her laughter and saw the gleam in her eyes, his heart suddenly began to race, and he realized that he had been mistaken. Hu Xiaomei had changed. Her immaturity was gone, to be replaced by a certain charm and charisma. Another vixen, Bai Xiaochun exclaimed inwardly. How could I have not seen it before? Swallowing hard, he contemplated how Hu Xiaomei might actually end up surpassing Song Junwan. However, the fact that his heart had begun to race simply because she was looking at him was actually a bit embarrassing. Clearing his throat, he decided to change the subject, and asked Hu Xiaomei about how she had ended up being picked to go to Heavenspan Island. She immediately gave a snort of irritation. What, you think I'm Song Junwan or something? That old crone has been plotting for years to get you, big bro Xiaochun. She might have put on a show of taking care of me, but she used her status as the leader of the Bloodstream Division's middle peak to beat me down over and over again. What? Bai Xiaochun blurted in shock. He couldn't envision Song Junwan being a person like that, and even opened his mouth to try to explain. However, Hu Xiaomei apparently realized what he was going to do, and continued speaking before he could. Big bro Xiaochun, you really have no idea. That old hag Song Junwan always shows off every chance she can get. I can't even stand talking with her. As far as she's concerned, I'm just an annoyance. Back in the competition to come here, she and I fought a duel in the semifinals. Her cultivation base was higher than mine, and she had already won several victories. Even if she lost to me, she would still have a chance to go on. But it was my last chance. If I lost, then I would be out. Can you believe that she didn't show the slightest mercy? I even explained everything to her, and she still beat me. The more Hu Xiaomei talked, the madder she got. Thankfully, the elder in charge from Heavenspan Island saw something special in me, something that makes me suitable to the divine abilities of Heavenspan Island. That was the only reason that in the end, I got chosen, and that old crone didn't. As Hu Xiaomei blurted out all her accusations against Song Junwan, Bai Xiaochun's head started to swell. From what he could tell, Song Junwan and Hu Xiaomei simply couldn't see eye to eye on anything. And apparently, it all stemmed back to the days of the spirit and bloodstream sects, after the war was fought and the two of them helped nurse him back to health. He suddenly thought back to how both of them would brew medicine for him, and then watch closely to see which one he would pick. Then his heart trembled as he remembered how, on one occasion, they had waited to see which foot he would use to step outside the door. He quickly changed the topic, worried that a bigger problem could arise if the current conversation continued. Hu Xiaomei was just happy to see him, so she didn't mind that he changed the topic. She sat next to him and softly told him about some of the interesting and funny things that had happened while he was gone. She also told him a few things about Heavenspan Island. Bai Xiaochun smiled, occasionally gasping in praise, and occasionally throwing in a few boasts of his own. Eventually, dawn approached, and Hu Xiaomei reluctantly left. Soon, the cultivators from the Four Rivers would go to offer their respects to the Celestial, an important event in which Hu Xiaomei had her own duties to attend to. After seeing Hu Xiaomei off, Bai Xiaochun took a deep breath and thought back to her visit. No matter how he looked at it, he couldn't think of anything that had seemed suspicious at all. In fact, that made him suspect Du Lingfei's words. Why would she tell me to be careful of Hu Xiaomei? No amount of thought brought any insight. Eventually, the sun rose. As the first rays of light shone out across the golden heavenspan sea, the sound of an ancient bell rang out across the island. The bell tolled 7 times, which was the summons for the cultivators from the Four Rivers to go see the Celestial. The sound of the bell, coupled with the dazzling sunlight reflecting off of the golden sea water, made for a spectacular scene. In the middle of the main island, the 3 mountain peaks caught the sunlight and reflected it, making for a particularly eye-catching scene. At the same time, the silent pressure weighing down grew more intense. At about this time, the special guards who were tasked with leading the groups of cultivators into the main island appeared outside of the various residences. The person who had come to lead Bai Xiaochun was a beautiful female cultivator, and was not the same person that had led him to the residence the day before. It was impossible to tell which river branch she had originally come from. However, considering that Bai Xiaochun was a diva, she treated him with the utmost deference. Even though she was an initiate special guard here on Heavenspan Island, she still didn't dare to act inappropriately in front of a diva. The initiate special guards were only in the core formation stage, but even nascent soul experts would treat them politely. Despite that, the guards would not dare to use their status as an excuse to treat a diva improperly. After all, devas were very important people to the Celestial, far more important than an initiate special guard. The woman led Bai Xiaochun along a winding path deep into the mountains. Their destination looked like a celestial paradise, complete with singing birds and blooming flowers. Lush vegetation grew everywhere, and spiritual energy abounded. There were also spirit beasts that dashed to and fro among the greenery. Furthermore, Bai Xiaochun noticed quite a few varieties of extremely rare spirit plants. In the outside world, they would be almost impossible to find, but here on Heavenspan Island, they grew everywhere. He was quite taken aback. He even noticed some shocking medicinal plants which were supposedly extinct. If he took one of those plants outside, everyone in the world would go crazy. Such extravagance, he thought. Although he had seen many extraordinary things in his life, he still had to swallow down his astonishment and work hard to resist the urge to reach out and harvest some of the plants. As he walked along, he saw more and more rare spirit plants, and also, extraordinary magical items. Some of them even had spirit automatons and flew about in groups as if they were alive. It was truly a shocking sight. Occasionally, rivulets and streams could be seen, within which flowed water that wasn't golden, but rather, violet. Based on what Bai Xiaochun could sense, the spiritual energy in that violet water surpassed even the golden sea water. He could also sense auras near the streams and rivulets that were shockingly impressive. From what he could tell, they belonged to plants, magical items, or possibly, diva-level spirit beasts. Everything that he saw reinforced his assessment that this was a shocking and extravagant place. Although Arch-Emperor City in the Wildlands had been impressive, it couldn't compare to this at all. This really was a celestial paradise. The initiate special guard who was leading him glanced over occasionally to size him up. When she saw how shocked he was, she felt very pleased. She was proud to be an initiate special guard, and thirsted for the day when she might get a promotion to being a full special guard. Bai Xiaochun didn't notice her change in attitude. All he could think about was how he was on a virtual mountain of precious items. Just about everything around him could increase his cultivation base or add to his longevity. He almost couldn't resist the urge to reach out and touch them. Eventually, they reached the very depths of the island, a location very close to the three mountain peaks. At one point, Bai Xiaochun got the distinct sensation that they had just passed through some invisible barrier. A sound met his ears like a rushing waterfall, and he looked up to see something completely unexpected. Waterfalls poured down from the summits of the two mountains on the right and left. It was almost like water cascading from the highest heavens, which then collected in a huge lake in the middle of the island. The very center of Heavenspan Island wasn't a flat plain. It was actually an enormous lake. It was a lake of violet water, and the three towering mountain peaks rose up from the very middle of it. The waterfalls from the two side mountains fed the lake, and created not only a thunderous roar, but also, a vast quantity of water vapor. Numerous palaces could be seen within the mists, which rose up along with the three mountain peaks. There were so many luxurious palaces constructed on the three mountains that Bai Xiaochun couldn't even count them all. There was an enormous statue on the central mountain peak, which Bai Xiaochun instantly recognized. It depicted the Celestial. At the feet of the statue was the largest and most magnificent palace in all of the Heavenspan realm. The Palace of the Celestial. The entire area had come to be known by a special name. The Palace of the Tao. Bai Xiaochun was completely shaken. Because of how much mist filled the area, the Palace of the Tao was difficult to see clearly. However, it was still possible to make out countless palace maids and numerous special guards, all of them standing silently with looks of proud arrogance in their eyes. The female cultivator led Bai Xiaochun to a huge public square at the edge of the lake, just across from the main mountain peak. From this location, it was possible to look up and see the huge statue of the Celestial, which seemed to prop up the very heavens. There were already quite a few cultivators gathered in the square, all of whom were looking up at the statue, eyes burning with veneration. Big Fatty Zhang and Bai Xiaochun's other friends were there, all of them seemingly overwhelmed with emotion. When they and the other cultivators from the eastern Heavenspan River noticed Bai Xiaochun, they hurried over. The Palace of the Tao is the most extravagant palace I've ever seen in my life. Did you guys see the medicinal plants? I saw an immortal Asura orchid on my way over. Heavens! Those orchids only grew in ancient times. Supposedly, if a mortal ate one, he would immediately rise to the core formation stage. That's nothing. I saw a two-headed dragon. Did you hear me? A dragon. With two heads. You almost never see those in real life. Everyone was very excited, and couldn't stop talking about everything they had seen. The truth was that the palace of the Tao really was a profoundly shocking place. Bai Xiaochun looked up at the huge statue of the Celestial, which was remarkably lifelike. Based on what he remembered of the Celestial, this statue looked exactly like him in every way. In fact, he happened to notice that there on the statue's forehead was a lock of blood-red hair. He suddenly shivered. At the same time, he heard a voice speaking loudly from among the nearby cultivators from the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. It was the twin master Cloud Lightnings. Do you see that blood hair on the exalted Celestial's forehead? According to the legends, that's actually a precious treasure of life force, forged by the Celestial himself. It contains boundless power, and is a rarely seen type of good fortune containing unfathomable mysteries. The instant Bai Xiaochun heard the twin master Cloud Lightnings introducing that blood hair to the other cultivators, his anxiety and guilt grew. He couldn't help but have a bit of a guilty conscience. Besides, if the Celestial found out that he had actually absorbed the blood hair, he might very well refine Bai Xiaochun to replace it. That blood hair wasn't as amazing as the twin master Cloud Lightnings makes it sound. All it did was push me to the great circle of the undying bones. All of a sudden, he thought about what would happen if his relationship with Du Lingfei went to the next step, and the Celestial ended up as his father-in-law. If it was his father-in-law who found out later that he had absorbed that hair, it probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. Having reached this point in his train of thought, he blinked a few times and then looked around for Du Lingfei. Even as Bai Xiaochun started to look around for Du Lingfei, someone inside the grand hall on top of the main mountain peak looked down, casting a gaze onto the lands below that caused the sky to grow dim and a huge wind to kick up. The heaven-span sea went still, as did the waterfalls and the surface of the lake. Because of that gaze, the entire island began to tremble. Everyone in the square, including Bai Xiaochun, felt their minds reeling madly. All talk ceased, and all hearts began to race as an indescribable pressure suddenly weighed down on all of them. It was so intense that none of them could move a muscle. Not even Bai Xiaochun and the other devas could move. The level of pressure weighing down on them was so intense that rumbling sounds filled their bodies. The Celestial. This was not Bai Xiaochun's first time sensing the might of the Celestial. Back in the Wildlands, he had felt this very same pressure. Now, though, things were different than in the Wildlands. The Celestial's aura seemed more explosive and violent, to the point where Bai Xiaochun felt his internal organs trembling. It was energy that surpassed the Diva realm by many times, and even the demigod level. This was the absolute peak level of power in this world. He's not injured? Bai Xiaochun thought, shivering. The other devas were shaking uncontrollably, so there was little need to mention the nascent soul experts, whose minds were almost complete blanks. It was at this point that a young woman walked out from the palace at the foot of the huge statue. She wore garments adorned with phoenixes and radiated nobility. She was none other than Du Lingfei. As she floated there in midair, with the enormous statue behind her, she spoke in a mighty voice that echoed out in all directions. Bo! In immediate response, everyone in the square, including Bai Xiaochun, involuntarily clasped hands and bowed deeply to the statue of the Celestial. Greetings, Celestial. Their combined voices created a sound wave that caused heaven and earth to tremble. Their voices quavered with zeal and fervor, the raw adoration for someone who commanded the ultimate level of power. As everyone bowed, Du Lingfei turned to the side in deference. Then, when the crowd below had finished offering formal greetings, she turned back and looked over the crowd. Her gaze lingered on Bai Xiaochun for only the slightest moment and didn't reveal any sign of recognition. Fellow Taoists, you already know the rules of this trial, she said coolly. The first person to emerge will become the Celestial's next apprentice. In terms of the time limit, there is none. With that, she waved her hands, whereupon the special guards in the square began to distribute jade slips to all the cultivators present. These jade slips will record your activities in the trial by fire, and when you find the exit, they will act as authentication devices to bear witness to your success. After finishing her explanation, she extended her hand to summon a violet rock. Waving her hand, she sent the rock flying down toward the lake below. The rock became a violet beam of light that, just before it hit the surface of the lake, exploded. Water sprayed out in all directions, and then, a huge stone gate rose up from the bottom of the lake. It was fully 300 meters tall, and radiated an aura of profound ancientness. It was engraved with countless vicious and snarling faces, lifelike to the extreme, to the point where it was almost possible to hear them howling. Black mist swirled off of the surface of the gate, transforming into 99 black dragons whose howls shook heaven and earth. Each dragon was 3,000 meters long, and they all twisted and spun up into the sky, as though they wished to break through to the area beyond the heavens. Compared to the dragons, the stone gate was so tiny as to be insignificant. Everyone in the square was shaken to the core by what they were seeing. As the dragons howled, a cold snort suddenly echoed out from the enormous statue of the Celestial, a snort that was as heaven-rending and earth-crushing as a bolt of lightning from the heavens. The dragon's howls of rage transformed into piteous wails of despair and defiance, and then they shattered into pieces. The entire process only lasted for a few breaths worth of time. The dragons collapsed into black mist that swirled around the stone gate and transformed into an enormous vortex. As the vortex spun, immense levels of power gripped the stone gate, tugging at it, until cracks began to spread out on its surface. At the same time, a dark and sinister aura began to seep out from the cracks, making it seem as though all the lands would be plunged into wintry cold. It was a frigid chi that seemed capable of freezing souls. Even Bai Xiaochun shivered as he looked at the cracks which, despite not seeming very big, were actually dozens of meters wide. Not even by calling upon the full power of his diva cultivation base was he able to see the world that existed beyond those cracks clearly. Despite that, both Bai Xiaochun and everyone else present could tell that this trial by fire would be very difficult. The twin Master Cloud Lightnings, Master Thousand Ghost and Guru Spirit Immortal all had very serious expressions on their faces, and it was the same with all of the various nascent soul cultivators. Song Ke, Bai Lin, Zhao Tianzhao, Heretic, and everyone else present was completely shaken. The gate leading to the trial by fire was completely bizarre, and at the same time, led almost everyone to the same question. Why was the Celestial using these rules and this dangerous trial by fire in order to select a new apprentice? After all, the nascent soul cultivators who were participating in the trial were cunning foxes whose understanding of the art of scheming surpassed cultivators of lower levels. It would be almost impossible for them to avoid being suspicious of situations like this. Everyone in the crowd was so shocked that none of them noticed how big Fatty Zhang's eyes were wider than anyone else's. And that was because he had seen this stone gate in his dream. One last reminder, Du Lingfei said softly. Instantly, the cultivators in the square looked over at her. The trial by fire consists of an enormous land that, despite not being endless, is so huge it defies description. It consists of 4 main areas, a deep marsh, a wild jungle, a vast plain, and a barren desert. Whatever magical items you bring with you into the trial by fire will not function. Pay attention to your spiritual power. In the land of the trial by fire, spiritual energy is scarce. To come out on top in the trial by fire, and in fact, to simply survive, you will need to carefully control your spiritual power. However, there are many unbonded magical items inside. If you can acquire them, they will increase your battle prowess and make it much easier for you to succeed. You won't be the only ones inside the trial. I will lead a group of Heavenspan Island's special guards inside, and we will be tasked with supervising, appraising, and adjudicating disputes. Du Lingfei's words caused most of the crowd in the square to relax a bit. Now that they knew they wouldn't be alone, but would have Heavenspan Island's special guards in the trial with them, they felt much safer. Furthermore, Du Lingfei, who was the Heavenspan emissary, would also be going in. Because of all of that, everyone felt much less nervous. The twin Master Cloud Lightnings, Master Thousand Ghost and Guru Spirit Immortal were also relieved. Although they weren't personally aware of all the details of Du Lingfei's identity, they had been devas for many years, and had many speculations. The fact that Du Lingfei was personally entering the trial by fire led them to the conclusion that, although there would be danger, it truly was being held to pick an apprentice for the Celestial. When Du Lingfei saw everyone breathing sighs of relief, she reached out and pointed at the stone gate. Let the trial by fire begin. A gravitational force sprang out from the vortex, causing rumbling sounds to fill the air. At the same time, the cracks on the door widened, sending even more frigid chi out. Although the frigid chi was intense, it couldn't match the burning passion in the hearts of the trial takers. Without any hesitation, they began to fly into the air, and then pass through the stone gate. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.